Welcome back to She Can, where women lead by example. They lead with their stories and tell us how they got to where they are today, to be role models for others and guide them and support them on their journey. I'm very excited to talk to Christine Murphy today. Christine, welcome to She Can. You're a writer and a fighter. You have a Ph.D. in religious studies. You are a trained Buddhistologist. You have written a book called Notes on Surviving the Fire, which is coming out on February 25th. I would like to recommend for everyone to go and pre-order. It's a razor sharp, biting and savage literary novel about male violence, a woman's vengeance, and whether killing is ever justified. You have lived and worked and traveled in over 100 countries. You've done very many incredible things like living in a tent in Africa, in a nunnery in the Himalayas. You've been on a horse crossing Mongolia. So you've done lots of crazy things that you're going to talk to us about. And what I think is very important and how I found you is that you're using your voice for what you believe in, and you break down complex things into very manageable and understandable things, and you're using your voice to support others that might be so numb at this point in time that they don't really know what they can do to counter an extreme right push. So tell us about your journey, Christine. How did you get to where you are today?
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. I'm so happy to talk with you today. Gosh, I think the short answer is I have always been a bit of an odd duck, and I just decided to embrace my odd duckness. I grew up in a rural area, and at a very young age knew that I wanted to explore the world and found ways to make that happen. So I attended university outside of the US. I'm American by birth. I did my undergraduate degree in the UK. It was significantly cheaper than doing it in the US. A
Mhm.
lot of people think I'm some kind of princess, studying in a foreign country without understanding how prohibitively expensive higher education is in the US.
Yeah.
That included a year in France, and I found jobs in Italy over the summer and Germany. I worked in Japan for 2 years with the JET program teaching English. I lived in a very remote little hamlet in Japan and saved my money and spent a year in a tent, 11 months backpacking across the African continent. And then I did a master's degree at Oxford and worked, oh gosh, all sorts of bars, waiting tables. I was a nude model for the local art school for a while, anything to save some money and help me pay my bills. And then I was in a Buddhist nunnery in the Himalayas for a year where I wrote a book, unpublished, lives on the cloud. And then I moved to Southern California after 10 years internationally to do my PhD in religious studies. That included 2 years in Mongolia at a monastery in Ulaanbaatar. And now I'm back in the Northeast as a novelist and a freelance philanthropic communications consultant. I help nonprofits draft compelling proposals and an advocate. And people often say, "Wow, that's a winding road you got there," and it is. It absolutely is. But what I like to tell people is, sometimes there are parts of ourselves that know us better than our brain. We tend to listen to our brain. But if there's a little part of you that's like, I think I want to write a novel, and your brain says, well, you don't know how to do that. Your brain isn't wrong, but it doesn't mean it's 100% right. So if you want to move to a foreign country and your brain's like, well, I don't know anyone who's ever done that. No one in my family had ever lived outside of the US before I decided to do that. So I feel like people hear my life and they think, oh, she's probably like the daughter of diplomats, like she grew up in DC, multilingual. Absolutely not. I grew up on a farm in rural New Hampshire, and I just found a way to hightail it out of there. Might be hightailing it out again, quite frankly, given the situation. So I think my advice is always look for opportunities because there's so many options. If you're willing to think outside the box, be creative. I got a job teaching English. Never taught English in my life. Never spent time with children in my life, but I wanted to go to Japan. That was a great opportunity, so I took it. I wanted to spend time across the African continent. I had some money saved up, not a lot, but some. I saw an opportunity to hop on a truck and backpack for a year. I was like, I've never spent a night in a tent, maybe twice. I didn't grow up camping, but I was like, what's the worst that can happen, right? I hate it and I leave. So I did it. It was amazing. So I feel like my advice is listen to yourself, that weird little part of yourself that's like, I kind of want to do this crazy thing, and then just try doing the crazy thing.
Christine, given that this novel is coming out on the 25th of February, I feel like we need to talk about that first. Tell us a little bit about this book. What is this book about? Where do you draw the story from? And tell us a bit more about the writing process.
Sure. So this is the North American cover that you'll see in Canada and the US. And this is the international cover, UK, Europe, English language bookstores, Australia, New Zealand. So the book is coming from a really personal place. It is about a woman who has survived sexual violence in her PhD program and is still trying to navigate the PhD program while she navigates the maze of bureaucracy that is American higher education, trying to find tenure track professorships.
Mm.
I spun it as a murder mystery. Her best friend shows up dead and she's convinced he was murdered, but no one believes her. The police don't believe her. So in her PTSD rattled state, she goes on a quest to find out whether or not he was killed. It takes place in California during wildfires. And it comes from a lot of my own experience. I was myself sexually assaulted during the first year of my PhD. Nobody believed me that it happened to me. So I kind of phrased the disbelief around the assault and I spun it into the murder mystery, the disbelief around she's convinced her friend was murdered. No one else believes her. Unfortunately, wildfires are a very common occurrence in the American West. When I was living there, we had the Thomas fires around Santa Barbara, which were particularly terrifying. And I had many students who were displaced due to that. And I tried to navigate the higher education system in the US, looking for tenure track professorships, but higher education in the US is really in a period of crisis, and there are very few roles. So I jumped ship out of that. But I think for me, the biggest motivation for the story was there's this whole genre of like rape revenge stories, and they're like B-list movies, or they're these kind of just not very good plot lines that show up in mainstream fiction. Game of Thrones had a bunch of them, and they make two assumptions. One, they assume that if you experience sexual violence, you automatically want to become violent yourself. You want revenge. You want to kill the guy who attacked you. And two, they take this instance, the sexual violence, and they turn it into the character's entire personality, their entire life. And my own lived experience with sexual violence was the opposite of that. I didn't want to kill anybody. I was like, well, wait a minute. You're telling me now that I have to deal with like surviving rape and learning how to live in this world, you think you want me to become a murderer too? And I have to navigate that identity? I was like, that's crazy. I don't want anything to do with that. And I think for anyone who experiences trauma, whether it's violence or grief or the loss of a child or displacement through political unrest, the heartbreaking truth is that your world might feel like it's ended, but the rest of the world carries on. And so this idea that this one terrible thing has happened and everything stops and the whole story is around that terrible thing, it just felt really disingenuous to me, and it felt kind of lazy. And I was like, that's not how trauma works. So I wanted to craft a realistic kind of story around that. But also, I'll be honest with you, Stephanie, I wanted it to be fun. Like, I wanted a page turner. I wanted a car chase. I wanted a sex scene. I wanted a whodunit. I love a murder mystery. I wanted at least one like really gory scene. So I have only one really gory scene that I had so much fun with. My editors told me to tone it down. They were like, that's Christine, that's a little too much. So I had to dial it down. So I just thought, I was like, I've never read a book that looked at rape in particular from a realistic way, that made it an interesting and engaging and intelligent commentary on sexual violence, but also systems of oppression, right? Like sexual violence exists within a patriarchal power dynamic. So higher education is a system of oppression. And I was like, can it be funny? Like my character's a riot. Like I don't know. I was like, I don't know. Can you write a funny book around rape? So that's what I tried to do. And the feedback I'm getting is I was pretty successful. So yeah, I'm excited. It's a weird book, but I had a great time with it. I love it. My baby.
Yeah, amazing. Christine, so it's coming out on the 25th of Feb around the
Yeah.
world. People can
Yes.
pre-order it now. Do you have a book tour coming up?
I do. I do. So I will be in New England, 25th, 26th, and 27th of February, a few events around Boston, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. I will be in the UK in June. We're still figuring out all of that. And then I will be out in California, maybe August. We're trying to figure that out. And then, depending on the popularity of the book, more events will pop up. So if
Yeah.
people want to see me in person, please buy the book, spread it to book clubs. I will say one little plug. I'll say I love discussing books. I love meeting readers. So I would be thrilled to hop on a Zoom call with any book club anywhere. So if people are interested in using this book for their book club and would like me to Skype in or Zoom in, please go to my website, christinemurphyauthor.com. There's a contact form there. I would be thrilled. I love doing it completely free. You don't pay me. Because I just love chatting with readers. And I think it's a book that inspires a lot of conversation. So I would love to be a fly on the wall in those conversations.
Christine, I love that, and thank you for putting that out there. I'm wondering, what do you feel matters most to you now? You've got the first published book. It's not the first book you wrote, but it's the first book you published. What do you feel really matters to you now?
Uh, Stephanie, I think I think like a lot of people in the world, I'd say the US, but I think the world is looking at the US right now very closely. And I think a lot of us are holding our breath.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us are terrified. And I think a lot of us are confused and disgusted and heartbroken. So what matters to me now is I think we need to remember that as human beings, we have much more in common with each other than we have dividing each other. This book really looks at violence against women, the way it tends to exist systemically. And I'm in the middle of writing my next book, and it looks at violence against men and the way it exists systemically. And they're very different books. They have a very different style and tone, but I actually see them kind of as a pair, like you read them together. And um, I just see so much division in the world. And I think it's a very transparent attempt by this teeny tiny group of billionaires who are looking to divide human beings and to say, no, 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 it's not about money. It's about trans people. It's about people of color. It's women or it's men. And it's not about any of that. And what matters to me most is that as human beings, we can remember that we are human first, that violence is never appropriate, that we have the right to dignity and safety and pursuing joy, like making art or reading art or walking our dog or petting my cat who's literally right over there, and that we can push back in effective ways that are not violent but that are very clear that the current attempt to just dismantle the world and rip it apart, not for anyone's benefit, like literally the benefit of maybe a handful of people, that is not acceptable. And I'm hoping that this is a time in the world where we will actually unite as human beings, because like dividing us and pitting us against each other, it's kind of been the lay of the land in human history for a long time. And if you look at where we are as a planet, I would say it hasn't worked very well. And I'm hoping we're in for a real ideological change, and promoting that is a big, that's at the core of everything I'm saying on social media. It's at the core of everything I write. um that is kind of maybe, I guess, my life's mission, if you
Well,
will.
it's a mission that's fully aligned with us. We're doing she can to build the bridges, to show how much more united we are than we are divided. and to build a common ground of A, hope, B, role models who are doing it. So showing people, men and women, who are doing it well, where it works. We are going to start interviewing men across the world who are building the bridges, who are showing that an inclusive workplace is really beneficial for the bottom line. And so I'm wondering, Christine, you have very important messages, and you are someone who's using her voice for all the things that you believe in and how you want to matter in the world. Let's get into that a little bit. We both know that by talking about it, we will be penalized by YouTube, by Google, by Instagram. Even talking about it in broad terms, the algorithm will make sure that this story gets pushed out to fewer people. But nevertheless, it's really important to show up as humans for the greater good. So tell us a little bit more about where you want to go with this.
I think you touched on something. One thing that I hear from so many people who message me on social media is they feel hopeless.
Mm,
And I feel very strongly that we have to stay engaged and we have to maintain hope because, one, I think it's how you get out of bed in the morning, right? Like it's how you as an individual keep going. But two, when we're looking at systems, any scientist will tell you one of the rules of nature is nature hates a void, right? You hate a vacuum. Like if you take something away, something will grow in its place. And so if you step back and give up hope and abandon things, whether you want to refer to it as like the natural law of things growing or the law of entropy, things devolving, or just somebody coming in and being like, oh, there's space for my voice because she stopped talking. I think we have to stay engaged in a way that is sustainable. In development work, we talk a lot about sustainable development, which is to say you can't exhaust your staff, you can't exhaust your donors. Like, how do you keep going when the machine of fundraising is a machine, right? Like, it is a daily thing in a way that you can keep the machine going. And I think as humans, anyone who's dealt with for example, mental health, right? Like depression or anxiety, you understand this metaphor, this idea of having to figure out a way to keep going. Um, and I feel very strongly that this message of dividing us, of pointing to women, to pointing to people of color, gay people, trans people, it's so transparent and it's so offensive and dehumanizing because what it's trying to do and what it has been very effective at doing is distracting us from the main issue.
yeah.
You know, everything has become more efficient across the planet in the last 50 years. Labor costs have gone down, technology has gone up. We don't spend as much time keeping ourselves alive in the day to day as we used to. And yet, cost of living has gone through the roof. Where has that money gone? If we are saving money through the efficiency of development and technology, but everything costs more, where is that increasing gap of finances? Where is it going? Because it certainly hasn't been spread to human beings. AI is coming up as an issue that I know as artists, we have a different kind of thought process on this, but a lot of AI is being used and people are losing their jobs.
Yeah.
That I find that very odd. Like, isn't the point to get machines, technology to do jobs so that humans can have time to make art and be in the world and protect the planet? Like, the answer is so blatantly obvious that all of this money, all of this time, all of these resources that are being siphoned off of the vast majority, billions of people, are going into the pockets of a very, very, very small group of people who are not contributing or giving back. And they themselves are wildly short-sighted because they're not taking care of the planet. And where are they going to go? How are you going to buy your way out of a climate crisis? When I lived in Mongolia, Ulaanbaatar has the worst air pollution on the planet. It is a city of, at the time I was there, it was like 2 to 3 million people, which is roughly the population of the state of New Hampshire, where I grew up, which is like a tiny little state in America. It has worse air pollution than all of Beijing, to give you an idea, which has a
Wow.
population of like 20 to 40 million, depending on where you
Mm,
define the limits of the city. And I had several friends who were doing doctoral research in air pollution, and they all said the same thing, which is that air pollution is the common denominator offender because you can't buy your way out of it.
Yeah.
You can buy bottled water if the public water supply is damaged. You can move your house from seaside if it's going underwater to up a mountaintop. You can evacuate during forest fires, as we see a lot of celebrities doing in
Yeah.
the California area. But air pollution, even if you buy the fancy masks, even if you buy filters for your house, air pollution is kind of unescapable. And so, you know, the thing that I care about is just human beings need to understand that whether we want it or not, whether we like it or not, we are all in this together.
Yeah.
Even the people fighting against us, they just don't see it. They're very short-sighted. They might be technological geniuses that built companies that earn the millions, billions of dollars, but they don't actually understand how things work. And for those of us who aren't distracted by our billion-dollar companies because we don't have them, it's very clear to observe the very obvious pattern. And the good news is there are many more of us than there are of them, and we just need to get the message out that the world doesn't need to be this way. We got used to it. We're used to it. Americans are used to working 2 or 3 jobs and still not being able to pay their bills. That doesn't mean it's the only way to live, and it's certainly not the best way to live. So communicating that there are other possibilities so that people know other possibilities exist and are willing to believe in those possibilities and then make change towards those possibilities, I think is really essential.
Christine, so give us your top tips on how you think we can hold against what is going on right now. What are your top tips of what people, every one of us can do? What is in the wheelhouse of every one of us, especially the people living in America right now? What can they do?
So I actually frame everything around this like 3-part system that I came up with. I think we're in the middle of a big thing, right? Saving democracy in America. It's a big thing. And I follow this DBT: dopamine, boundaries, taking action. Dopamine, the first thing, you gotta find something in your life or many things that bring you joy. And it could be making art, it could be reading art, it could be cuddling your kids, it could be kissing your partner, it could be going for a walk, it could be the gym, it could be a really big thing like working on a massive, I don't know, 12 by 12 foot tapestry. It could be a little thing like chocolate with your lunch, whatever. But you got to keep something in your life that keeps you going, right?
Yeah.
It's airplane logic. You put your own safety mask on first before you put your other safety mask on. And that's to keep you energized and motivated. It doesn't have to be huge. It could be, I love bubble baths. I do a lot of bubble baths. When I'm stressed, you can like find me underwater most of the time. The second thing is boundaries. It is so easy to be overwhelmed and inundated by news. So I would tell people to pick 2, maybe 3 news sources that they find reliable. In the US, we have the Associated Press. We have Cox Richardson is a professor out of Bowdoin, right up the road. She does a wonderful newsletter. Internationally, the BBC, Al Jazeera, there's some really wonderful publications that you could look at and frankly ignore the rest. And boundaries also can work with friends and family. I just went to a party and we had a no politics rule. Everyone at that party is very engaged in politics, but we were like, look, we're having a cute little get together, an early Valentine's Day celebration. We're not going to discuss politics tonight. Boundaries are key so that you don't get overwhelmed. Also, so you don't get distracted. There are so many things under attack right now. It's okay to say, I care most about these 3 issues, and that's where I'm going to put my attention. It's okay. You don't have to solve every problem every time.
Yeah.
The third thing, and this is really key, is about taking action. So in the US, I am strongly advocating that everyone call their House of Representatives, their congresspeople, and their senators. The phone lines are overwhelmed because a lot of people are doing this, but that's a good thing. Leave a voice message, speak with a staffer, and express your strong disagreement with the current administration. Express specific disagreement with actual acts or bills that are being pushed through if you know of them. But if you don't, push back on the fact that we have an unelected individual currently ripping apart the country from the inside. So calling is really key. Many people love protesting, going to protests. I think that's fantastic. I'm also very aware that like not everybody is able-bodied, not everybody can take time off work. So it's really about doing what you can consistently so that you do begin to move the needle, because this stuff does matter. Dissenting matters. Expressing your opinion matters. Boycotting Amazon, for example, really matters. A national blackout that we're planning for the day of February 28th, no purchasing at all across the US. That really matters to disrupt the system. Also, not everybody can do everything, and that's okay. So don't beat yourself up if you can't go to a protest because you work a 9 to 5, or you take care of young kids, or you can't quit Amazon because you live in the middle of nowhere and it's the only way to get things delivered to your house. There are other things we can do. Taking action is a way to not only enact change, but I will say it also makes you feel a lot less helpless. You feel that you are using your voice, you're using your platform, and you are making a difference. And that feeds the whole system of the dopamine, and then making sure you're strategic with your time, you put boundaries up, and that keeps you with enough energy that you can then take action, which makes you feel better to feed the dopamine. I mean, it's really the whole system, which I'm writing about on my Substack. People can follow me there too, christinemurphyauthor.substack.com. That's how I kind of do any big thing, right? That's how I wrote a novel. That's how I did my PhD. That's how I survived sexual violence. Like that took me about a decade to recover from. And you need those three parts, because you got to keep yourself going. You can't let yourself get overwhelmed, but you got to stay engaged and make progress.
Yeah, I'm so thankful, Christine, that you said that, and you said it in such a great way. You got to be well in yourself. You can't overwhelm your central nervous system, and you need to have the joy to live a nice life and to
Yeah.
have the energy to hold against the things that are happening right now and can't happen and are actually unlawful. So, Christine, what would you say are your biggest lessons? And I'm also wondering, what what does the PhD in religious studies, how does that inform your life and the decisions you make? Because a
So I'll
lot of
answer
it
the
is
second
about
question.
ethics, isn't it? And I guess,
No.
this is where we are so divided, or we feel we're so divided on ethical and moral standards, and what we feel is being in alignment with our moral and ethical views.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So, my PhD is in religious studies. I refer to myself as a Buddhistologist, partly because it's such a fun word. And I studied Buddhism for my PhD. So there was a comprehensive education around sort of religion broadly, but my content focus was on Buddhist studies. Um, for a long time, I used to really disparage my PhD, and I was pretty angry at it because I was like, this took me 8 years of my life. I couldn't get a job. It cost me an enormous amount of money. I'm very poor. I had to create a whole new career for myself, and I was quite angry. I was very mad at my PhD. But actually, I'm now coming around to having great appreciation for this very profound opportunity to study, like you say, ethics and really world building, because religion is very much the story that groups of people tell themselves about how the world works
Yeah.
and what the rules of the world are. So, studying those different perspectives, those different sets of rules, the different checks and balances, right? Um, while I myself, because again, I was raped at the very beginning of my PhD, so it set kind of this trajectory of my perspective, and I couldn't help but think about my experience of a trauma survivor in a community where everybody knew about the assault and nothing was done, and how that fit in these different worldviews. And I think for many people, religion is a source of comfort and support, which I think is wonderful. But unfortunately, that comfort and support, when things get very scary, can become more and more solidified, and they cling to it instead of being willing to think a little bit broadly about how there are other ways to interpret some of these teachings. And as someone who is a very free thinker and independent thinker, and who does have a PhD in religious studies, when I read about or hear about or see people who are making this blanket statement, this is what that text means, this is what this means, you have to do this, it really angers me, because the simple fact is, anyone who's done any textual analysis, anyone who's done translation work, right? If you speak multiple languages, there's so many different ways to translate
So
everything.
good.
So utilizing anything, but particularly a world system, as a tool of oppression or as an instigation towards violence or violent beliefs is never acceptable. And it is, again, a very transparent manipulatory tactic designed to separate people so they're easier to control.
Yeah.
And what, I'm sorry, what was your first question? I
The
jumped in on the
main
second.
lessons. What do you feel are
The
your
main
biggest
lesson,
lessons?
my main lesson is funny, because when I was a young person, I was really bad at this. I had a friend who used to say, I think it's a quote from one of the Batman movies, actually. I think it's from Christian Bale, Batman Returns. Alfred Albert, the butler, he as a little boy, he hurt himself, and Alfred says, "Why do we fall down, Bruce? Why do we fall down? So we can pick ourselves up." And I think my big lesson is about resilience.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of research on resilience. Some people use the word grit. I quote Batman, but really it's about this idea that, when you're working on something, and whether it's a big thing because it means a lot to you, whether it's a big thing because it's a big thing, right? PhDs take a decade, like they're a long time.
Yeah.
Whether it's a big thing because it's kind of David and Goliath, you're going against an entire, administration, an entire regime. You will fail at times. You will trip up, you will fall down, you will make mistakes, you'll get canceled, everybody loves you and then everybody hates you. Like, that is the nature of the process. It's very true with writing. Ask any artist, I mean, maybe this book will be a huge hit and everyone will love it, and then everyone hates the next book. Maybe this book will bomb and then the next book will be big. Who knows, right? Like, those things
Yeah.
are totally out of my control, but long term, we pick ourselves back up after we fall. And I think that for me is the lesson that I have learned and am continuing to learn, because it's always hard to pick ourselves back up. It's always hard to look at how far we have to go when we're climbing a particularly big mountain. So, that's why you take your breaks, you enjoy the view behind you, you acknowledge how far you've come. And when you get your breath back, you keep going, because I think that's why we're here, right? That's why humans exist, to explore and expand and make the world better.
What a beautiful mic drop moment, Christine. I feel this deserves a real sacred pause. Christine, so what kind of a leader are you? Do you want to be? How do you want to show up as?
I think it's really important that leaders embody what they say. They do. It's not say as I do, or do as I say, not as I do. I try to be hopeful myself, just as I try and kind of inspire hope, and I try to be fair. I mean, I get angry like anybody, I get frustrated, but I really try and bring it back to the fact that we're all human. And I mean, for better or worse, we are all in this together. Like, the climate crisis, at least, is really showing us that all of us are affected.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I just try to be, you know, honest. Um, I think whether I like to or not, I'm a very authentic person. Like, I've never been any good at like putting, like the professional thing. I'm just terrible at that. So that, I guess, is kind of a strength and a weakness, because I can't fake it. I can't fake anything, um, at all. So, you show me a picture of a baby, and if I'm not interested in that baby, I'll be like, oh, and you really should fake enthusiasm when someone shows you a photo of their baby, and I can't even do that. So, the authenticity luckily kind of comes naturally to me, because I don't really have another option.
I love that. Christine, so what do you feel are the challenges you face as a person within your creative process of being a writer?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think there are kind of two ways to look at it. One is the creative sort of process, and I think for artists, it's always about being, yeah, being honest, really looking
Mm.
at what is it that you're trying to say, and you have to be brave. Like art really requires bravery because when I work with younger writers, a lot of times they have written a story that feels like wish fulfillment, which is different from escapism, and it feels like wish fulfillment from their perspective. So they have like the hero and he like really gets revenge on the bad guy, and I'm like, okay, okay. um and inevitably what they share with me is that the bad guy reminds them of someone from their past, and they were like, yeah, like he bullied me, but now in this book I create a scenario where I get to bully him. And I'm like, that is actually cathartic for you. It's not cathartic for the reader. Like we need to see the humanity in the bully. And that's actually going to be kind of hard for you because it means you need to reflect on the humanity of the people who hurt you instead of writing them off as a bad guy. And I think bringing it back to politics, I think that's one of the things we're struggling with now. People are writing each other off, stupid, crazy liberals, wackadoo Trump supporters. Like humans are humans, we all have needs and wants and desires, and seeing that human connection is so key. And then the other way to answer the question, like, publishing is tough. There's so many books out there, which, I mean, as a reader, I'm just thrilled. But to try and rise above the noise, it's tricky, and figuring out why something kicks off and gets popular, I don't know. I Who can tell? But I was a reader long before I was a writer, so I would never say publishing should shrink. I think publishing should expand. I don't really watch TV or movies or anything like that, so the more books, the better, in my opinion.
And Christine, what are you most proud of to date?
Oh, um, I'm a really good pet parent. My animals are very happy. My sweet little dog, when I was living in Mongolia, I found her as a little baby on the street and brought her to America with me. And George, my big orange cat, he was adopted from Sacramento, California when I lived there. And Charlie, my little black cat, he was a feral cat in Maine. And I make a lot of mistakes. I screw things up. I get things wrong a lot. But I have three very happy little beings who have happy lives with me, and you know, I'm very proud of that.
Christine, so what are your plans and goals for this year and beyond, 2025 and beyond?
Well, my agent gave me a deadline for the next book, so I got to do that. My freelance grant writing work, keep my clients happy so I can keep the lights on. And then I'm getting married this year, which is
Ooh.
fun. I think I've never been married, so we'll see how that goes. But honestly, my big plan is I would really love to help people and maybe build a community where we focus on like activism, art, supporting each other, and feeling like we feel connected. I think so many people, certainly in the US, but also internationally, just feel like they don't have a community anymore. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of research that is pointing to, especially like violence with young men, a lot of that is connected to extreme social isolation. And
Yeah.
so, asking what kind of leader I am, I don't know. I tend to be really good at like getting groups together. And I'm not the star of a party. I'm not very good at that, but I'm good at kind of corralling folks. And so, hopefully by the end of the year, I don't know what this will look like. It's still bubbling in my mind. I would love to be working on just helping to support people feel connected, feel they have a community, to engage with organizations and politics in a way that works for them and is meaningful for them, and to have joy in their lives. For me, art is a big source of joy. For other people, it might be other things, but it's important. We have to have that. We have to cultivate that.
I think you've said something very important. Connection seems to be the medicine that we all need. And we don't
No.
know all of us we need it, but we do need it. And the loneliness epidemic is a real thing and it's a global thing. And it feels a little bit like we're living in these experimental times where we see how far we can go in dividing ourselves from each other until something really breaks, or
Yeah.
countries break, or, you know, our societal structure really breaks down. And so, what how do you foresee the next couple of years if you have to think about what's going on, how you want to matter within it? How do you see it unfold? I mean, I know this is a crazy question and
Yeah.
it could be
Um,
have a million answers, but
I think it could go a lot of different ways. I would agree with you, Stephanie. I think we are at a point in human history where we are pushing people apart to such extremes that society itself is schisming. And as humans, there's this desperate urge to come back together. And when you look, for example, at American politics today, what I'm seeing is this terror of anyone who isn't followed in this very narrow definition and this desire to control everybody else. And I think that is rooted in such fear. And it's a fear I've never understood. I've always been very drawn to the other, you know. I will say I remember having a teacher when I was younger who said, you know, the thing about humans when they see something different, they either want to fight it or they want to fuck it. It's like I would agree with that, right? We're either drawn to it and we're intrigued and we're like, oh my gosh, tell me more. Or we're like, oh, I'm scared, go away, you know, I fight you. Um, I think the trajectory of control is very juvenile and it's short-sighted, partly because like who wants to be in control of everything? Like that has never appealed to me. I am not a power-hungry person. That sounds like a lot of work. I don't want to do that. But I'm also comfortable with myself and my place in the world. And I think for many people, the world has changed and they haven't been paying attention. And so what they perceive as their identity, as their values, they now think are under attack.
mm,
And, you know, it's like when I was a teenager, the big debate in politics was around gay marriage. And one of the things you would hear would be straight people saying, gay people get married. What does that do to my marriage? And even little me as a teenager, not politically active, I remember thinking, well, it doesn't do anything to your marriage. Like, why would it have any impact whatsoever? That's such an odd thought process to have. And yet, human beings have a way, again, I think out of the search for community, we insert ourselves. Like, white people love to have opinions on who gets to use the N word. My thought is, it's not my word. I don't have an opinion. I don't use it. Doesn't matter. Like, it's just not my word. Like, who cares what my opinion is? Irrelevant. Um, why would gay marriage have any impact on straight marriage? Why? So you know, the next few years, I think we're going to continue to see attempts at connection. And some of these attempts might seem really misguided and actually might seem like the opposite, like you're trying to shut people out. But really, what you're trying to do is like put them in a space that you can conceive, that you can understand, because your own understanding of the world is so limited. Um, you know, studies show that people who read fiction, who read stories, have much greater levels of empathy than
mm,
people who don't. And I think the world needs more empathy, which a lot of people misunderstand this word. It doesn't just mean like being nice and respectful. It means being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, being able to understand their perspective. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it, but you can understand where they're coming from. And as somebody who left my home country when I was 18, lived internationally for decades, like that comes very naturally to me because you can't really live in other countries and cultures if you think everybody's wrong and I'm the only one who's right. I mean, you would go crazy, right? Um, and I think we have the potential for that. You know, social media allows you to connect with human beings across the world, and translation technology allows you to speak with human beings across the world. And I just hope that we can find a way to um, find our common humanity
yeah.
rather than seeing nothing but difference. Because the differences I actually think are so small in comparison to what unites us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Christine. And I'm very grateful for all the incredible truths and your truths that you've been leading with in telling your story, Christine. And I often hear from very many people that the pendulum has swung too far. So the liberal worldview has been too much for so many people, which is why we're having a backlash now. And then I think, how can that make sense? I mean, yes, that is obviously a reality, but how can it make sense to try and do better and better for the greater good? And how can that pendulum ever swing too far? How can we, as women and who are not a minority, so we shouldn't even be part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion program because we are 50% of the world population, but because we are so underrepresented in so many industries, we have sort of ended up in that program. And this hatred against anybody that's different to a white man seems to be something that is now causing an enormous amount of fear. And I think a lot of this comes from a place of fear. And, what is the world going to look like? And people are stoked by that fear. Christine, so what would you like our listeners to take away from your story, if you could sum it up?
Well, a lot of what you just said, like fear is very human, but it's primitive, right? It's the lizard brain, and fear is an emotion. It's not a rational response.
Yeah.
So it's okay to be afraid of things. I actually would say fear for me now is more of a guiding light, and I go towards it rather than away from it.
Mm.
And I think the world has a lot of possibilities that we're not always aware of. And so, my biggest advice, especially for young folks, is to just allow yourself the possibility of something different. Allow yourself the thought of like, well, what if I wanted to move to a different country? No one in my family has ever done that. No one around me has ever done that. How? Where? What would that even look like? And just, gently explore things. And, when you find yourself afraid, whether it's afraid of a person or a place or a different group of people, maybe sit with that and ask, what is that fear really about? Because it might have nothing to do with them. Or it may, right? It may be from your own lived experience. But just we can feel an emotion and then we can have a response, but there is actually space in between there, right? Like I like to kind of sit in that in between space instead of like immediately reacting to whatever emotion or even thought bubbles up. Like give yourself chance to kind of just play with it, observe it. Like, oh, isn't that interesting? I saw that one guy and I was scared to death of him. Why? I've never met him before in my life. Like, what's that about? Or, oh, isn't that interesting? I saw somebody living a life I'd like to have, and immediately my thought was, well, you can't do that. Like, why not? Well, I mean, maybe I can't do it tomorrow, but could I build to that? I think we create boundaries for ourselves that don't need to be there.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how you can explore and experiment and life can lead you in directions you would never expect, but you got to be, you got to be open to seeing that direction and be willing to, give it a go. I take my life motto is like, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
Especially with me, dude. I'm like, okay, I moved to a country I hated, I moved back. Fine.
Yeah.
I get married to this guy, everything goes to hell. Well, then we get divorced. Like, like give it a go. I mean, you never know, and things might be so much better than you thought.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So, Christine, if you could send a postcard to every human in the world, what would be the one sentence that this postcard would say?
Ugh, probably that I love you,
Yeah.
and I hope you can love yourself and be kind to yourself and to others.
Yeah. Yeah. What a beautiful, beautiful moment to finish this story of yours. And Christine, thank you so much. What an amazing conversation. You're an amazing role model and mentor. Everyone go out and get Notes on Surviving the Fire, 25th of Feb. You can pre-order now. And I'm very excited, Christine, for you to come to England, and I hope to catch you then. And meanwhile, I keep following you and
Okay.
you using your voice, and I'm very grateful for you coming on to She Can.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.